Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers and rock stars of life. I am Katie Brewer and I'm going to start today's conversation with some statistics. 100 years ago, the number of wild lions in Africa was estimated to be 250,000. Today, it is about 15,000. That's 1-5, and that's a reduction in population size of nearly 95%. Lions have been forced to survive on land that is only 1/5 of the size they occupied a few decades ago. As habitats shrink further, it is predicted that in 20 years' time, there will be no lions left in the wild. Gerald Durrell said, "You cannot begin to preserve any species of animal unless you preserve the habitat in which it dwells. Disturb or destroy that habitat and you will exterminate the species as surely as if you had shot it." My guest today is devoted to reversing this trend. He campaigns to preserve habitat and improve the welfare of lions through education and by creating places of sanctuary. He is a world-renowned wildlife conservationist and self-taught animal behaviourist. He provides a caring home to rescued lions, leopards, hyenas and other predators. When interacting with them, he breaks every safety rule there is and instead uses love, understanding and trust to bond with the animals. The extraordinary relationships he forges has earned him the title, the Lion Whisperer. It is an honour to talk today to Kevin Richardson.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. It's an honour.
Well, the honour is all mine. I know your current mission is to make your job obsolete, and I'd like to talk in some detail about that later on. But first, I'd like to start right at the beginning. You grew up in the suburb of Orange Grove in northern Johannesburg. And how did your love of animals begin?
I'm told by my parents that I always had a fascination for the outdoors. So, when the other kids were playing inside, I was always wanting to get outside and play in the dirt. But my fondest memory came at about the age of 3-4 when my dad brought home a baby bird and I helped him nurse it back to health. And eventually that bird fledged. It was a great moment. And I think that's where the bug bit. It went from birds to insects to frogs to snakes, back to birds. And, so I think animals were always part of the foundations of my life. They were the foundations. And I suppose people who know me weren't surprised when I told them, hey, I'm going to start working with lions.
I loved your book, and in it you mentioned the vast array of animals you had in your house at any one time.
It was crazy, actually, thinking back. Obviously, that shaped who I am as a person. But, looking back at it, I just roll my eyes because it was an absolute nightmare house. It was this just dogs and cats and birds. And I suppose, like as I said in my book, I think my parents had a way of keeping us quiet when we were all nagging to go away on holiday by saying, okay, well, here's another animal for you to look after. Eventually, it got to a point where we couldn't go away because there was just too many animals to look after and no one to look after them. So maybe that was their strategy. I don't know. And
you became known as the Birdman of Orange Grove.
I think it just as I grew up, everyone started to know that if there was any rescue or any bird that needed rescuing or any bird found in the neighborhood, it would land up at our gate. In fact, so much so that some of the local people would purposefully go and get birds, get them out of nests to bring them so that we would give them what was known as 5 bob or 50 cents in the day to rescue the bird. So it was a way of making money, but as a kid, you don't think of all the down the line consequences of actions. You just are wanting to do good and help. And so that's no bird was unwelcome at the Richardson household.
How would you describe your teenage years?
Tumultuous. I look back and I think, gee whiskers, every parent's nightmare child. I suppose when my dad passed away, my wheels fell off. Or maybe it was an excuse to just run wild. I always say we never did when we were young, and I'm still friends with a lot of my partners in crime to this day. And we've all, funny enough, turned out okay. We survived and we didn't land ourselves in jail. But I always say, and it is important to say, is that we pushed boundaries, sure, but we did know right from wrong. We certainly at times pushed the right side of wrong. And but we never ever did anything maliciously. It wasn't malicious fun. It was never at other people's expenses, although my sister would probably disagree. We nicked her car one night and happened to roll it. And so it wasn't intentional. My son is now 12 years old, not too much younger than when we were getting up to this kind of nonsense. And he knows that if he did anything like that, he would absolutely be killed. So,
Does he know that you did it?
He does. I mean, he's heard a few stories, especially from my mother, and it is my past, so I don't shy away from it. I think one has to look at how you can educate him based on what you did and why you probably did what you did. And I suppose it makes a lot more sense being a father now, knowing why a kid would go off the rails. So hindsight's 20/20 vision, isn't it? At the time as a kid, you have no idea until later on in life. You then start to reflect and see how much of an impact something like that does have.
Well, despite all of that, the wild sort of partying and car taking and things like that, you do turn things around and you finish your degree. You become an exercise physiologist. And then how do you get from an exercise physiologist to an animal enrichment worker?
So it was a bit of a progression there. A specialist orthopedic surgeon was sending clients to where I worked, and a guy came. He would, to this day, argue what he came for, but nonetheless, I remember it was my version is at least he came for knee rehabilitation. His version is he came for back rehabilitation. But anyway, he had what seemed to be a love of the bush and nature, and that we had some commonality. So that obviously was a conversation point every time we saw each other, until one day he came and said to me he had purchased a park called the Lion Park that was kind of a landmark in its day. I mean, when I grew up, everyone knew about the Lion Park. That's how I got to meet Town Napoleon, which were two cubs that I got to meet.
And what was it about them? You were invited to go and you went every day. What kept you going back?
Yeah, look, so based on my history of really wanting to get to know animals on a very personal and intimate level, I saw opportunity in going to this park and, interacting with these animals who, quite frankly, I had a ill-conceived perception of. I, too, thought things about lions that were absolutely in my head.
Can you think of one of the misconceptions that you had?
Well, yeah, I mean, these cubs were 6 months old, and I thought that they would at any second turn and attack me. And, that would be the end, because, you were told that at 6 months, they're far too dangerous to be around the public. So now you're thinking, well, if they're too dangerous to be around the public, in a sense, I'm the public. So when is this lion going to turn on me? Those kind of things, and all these myths and misconceptions that are perpetuated by film and even some documentaries, to be clear. It was kind of like a challenge and starting to get to know these animals on their level. And then also just the evolution of realizing the oddity is that most people who work or start to work at zoos or lion parks or animal parks are animal loving people. You don't get animal haters going to work at zoos. But one would think that these places would be good because they're housing these animals. You'd expect permits to be all in place and people to have reasonable standard of ethics. So I suppose for me, that being a naive 22, 23-year-old only came later when you start to actually really ask those questions. The questioning person never went away. And I suppose early on in my career, I didn't want to know the answers because I didn't want what was happening before me to stop. So a lot of people, it's an interesting dynamic because, you read my book and it is filled with highlights. It's kind of Instagram of my life, highlight reel. But there were a lot of lows too that I couldn't possibly have written in, because that would have just spelt the death of me and everything I'd strived for and worked for. So there will be another book, and it will definitely dabble in those areas that went the areas that I wasn't so fond of, and the things that you understood and knew, but you knew you couldn't say anything about.
Could you talk about one of those sadder moments that you came across?
There's quite a few, but I mean, one of the beginning question marks that I started to have in the early days was when I arrived at work early and saw a vehicle with crates on the back collecting animals, and those animals would be loaded and disappear, lions to be specific. And one wouldn't get answers, especially when you were new at a facility, and so one just kept quiet about it. But as the knowledge started to build, you started to have more and more questions. And I suppose it's no secret, even I wrote about it in my book, was when Meg and Amy got sold to a facility that I didn't really paint as being as bad as it was in my book, because I had to be careful. It was my eyes being, opened to the reality of what I was actually involved with. It was problematic for me, being a person who has kind of dedicated his life to animals. But yeah, it was a conundrum, because it was almost like when you speak to a woman who was in a previously abusive relationship and you say, well, why didn't you get out of it? Why did you stay with him for 10 years? And yeah, it's easy for the outsider to look in and say, oh, if I was in your shoes, I would have done this or I would have done that. But it was so much more complicated than that, because not only was this about animal relationships, it was about human relationships too. A few people who were there at that park I was fond of. They were influential and they had the ability to stop what was going on. And I thought that would be the first port of call. Try and stop what's going on, change it, rehabilitate the place, make the place into something great. That started out as being a bit of a mission. And it wasn't, like some people would think, okay, you wake up in the morning and you go, okay, right, end of that chapter, open this chapter, now I'm heading here.
Yeah, no, life doesn't work that way. It's a creeping realization, isn't it? It takes a while to sink in.
100%. But I knew in the back of my mind which way I was wanting to go. And so I would chip away. And that's how you make change, is small changes every day. And then when you look back, there's a big change. And so a lot of people would want to see this change immediately. And a lot of activists just want to wave magic wands, and everything that they see that's bad just goes away. If you look at the general feeling of people towards animals in circuses, more specifically, not circuses, because if people want to do trapeze or acts in circuses, that's absolutely fine. And in fact, some circuses like the Cirque du Soleil are really incredible to see people doing these things. It's almost mystical and magical in many respects, But for people to move away from the traditional circuses took a long time. And there's some countries that still have the local circus. To us, it's foreign, but to those countries, it's totally normal.
I mean, I don't know if you know the name John Rendell. He died a couple of weeks ago, and he was the guy along with Anthony Bork, who bought a lion cub from the pet department in Harrods. And that was how did anyone think that was an okay thing, not for them to buy it, but for Harrods to sell lion cubs? But in the 1970s, that was quite the thing to have your own lion cub, and people accepted that. And now Christian the lion was reintroduced back into the wild successfully. And then you've got that 100 million clips on YouTube where they go back a year later and the wild lion recognizes them.
Well, that's the wonderful story. I knew John, I'm not going to say really, really well, but we had met a few times, and I've met Ace Bork in Australia at a function that I did there. So I met them both. But yeah, look, John would always laugh because the story gets made into something that it isn't. And you lose control over it, actually. You lose control over the narrative. I see it so many times on the internet with regards to me, where you actually read something, you go, wow, who is this guy? Oh, it's me.
That must be really annoying. Particularly if you're saying the wrong thing.
It's always the wrong thing, isn't it? It's like the old adage is, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? I think that with Christian the lion, people want a happy ending. Christian was killed by wild lions. He didn't have a happy ending.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that at all.
All the people out there want to know is that Christian got repatriated back to his homeland. He got integrated into a family. He was loved. He was released. He was such a wonderful lion that he even came back to say hello to his caregivers 2 years later. It's all based on a few half-truths, So, and anyway, I mean, not that John or Ace perpetuated any ill truth or false truth. It is what it is, So, unfortunately, captive lions, because I'm asked the same question, why didn't you release any of your cats into the wild? And the answer is, A, there's no habitat to release them into. B, if there is habitat available and that's suitable for lion to be in, and let's just say has populations of prey for wild lions to prey on, then any responsible reserve or game area would source wild lions, because there is a oversupply of wild lions in many parts of South Africa specifically, but in other parts of Africa too. So one would be very irresponsible in taking captive bred lions that their origins are not really known. You don't know their genetic history. The family trees are very badly documented. And releasing these animals probably to their certain death, or what's worse is that they wouldn't know what they should or shouldn't be eating. So the myth comes in is that they don't know how to hunt. Well, that's not true at all. My lions have hunted very successfully without being taught by me. In fact, they'll teach you a thing or two about how to hunt. It's in their blood. It's in their DNA. It's instinctive. It's complicated. They need to have their family groups. They need to know how to avoid other lions or deal with those other lions in a suitable way. They need to know what prey to eat. They can't just simply go to the nearest boundary fence, see a cow on the other side, break out and kill a cow. So there's a lot of things that are at play, and I've just listed a few. But getting back to our story, it's certainly mind-boggling to us sitting here now how Harrods could sell a lion cub. But back in the day, completely normal.
There are some lovely stories, and you've had a lot of highs with your lions and the animals in your care. Meg and Amy was a particular story that I loved, which was Maditau and had 3 male cubs, and Tabby, your 2 lionesses, had 2 female cubs, which were Meg and Amy, and Tabby rejects them, and you introduce them to Maditau, and I was wondering if you could just talk through what happened.
So one of the things that most people would like you to believe is that lionesses reject their cubs, especially in a captive environment, fairly readily. And it's actually not true. They're pretty good mothers. But Tabby was one of those characters. She just didn't think motherhood was for her. She rejected Meg and Amy. And I thought because her sister had cubs of her own, that she would just take them in and become the surrogate mother. And so I lured her out and took Meg and Amy and shuffled up the cubs and put them all in a row. And she came back in, and I'll never forget it. It was just such a dirty look, as if to say, do you think I'm so stupid?
I mean, there are lots of rules that you don't follow. You're supposed to have a stick. You're supposed to never turn your back. You're never supposed to get down to their level, and you do all of those things. And then the other rule is never, ever go into an enclosure with a lioness who has cubs.
Yeah. I mean, lionesses are notoriously protective over their offspring, their cubs. I mean, this is what they are about. This is their future, so they will protect those cubs with their lives normally. So for you to go in there and be able to just manhandle a lioness's cubs is mind-boggling. But such was the relationship with these lionesses. Maybe it was a bit of ignorance is bliss. Back in the day when I was very young and also relatively inexperienced, to be honest, working with the lions, I think they picked up on a bravery and a stupidity and a calmness. They really are attentive when it comes to your behavior. So I think that was probably my saving grace in many situations because of this, the belief that these animals would never do anything to harm me. But Madita, I had forged a really good bond with, and as with her sister Tabby. And so her look was never an aggressive look. It wasn't, I'm going to, touch my cubs again, I'm going to kill you. It was a dirty look. It was like, you think I'm so stupid that now I come back and I got 5 cubs and 2 of them are female and smell different and look different and act different. She just, one by one picked them up by the scruffs of their necks. Not very, I think she knew they were her sisters, but, so not very aggressively either, because she could just kill them with one bite. She picked them up and dropped them in the water trough that was there for her to drink. And she did it, put the one and then went back and dropped in the other and looked at me and went back and nurtured her cubs. Yeah, I had to take them out and raise them. And funny enough, I always laugh because Meg absolutely loved swimming. She loved water. You'd think they should be terrified of it later on in life, but she loved it.
Didn't you sort of introduce her to the water when later on and she sort of followed you in? So it was the fact that you were in that made her go in.
100%. I mean, the confidence that they would get from me would absolutely cause them to do things that they probably in many situations wouldn't have done. And so it speaks volumes when a animal like a lion trusts you so much that it would willingly come into water that it naturally doesn't like to come and say hello.
Yeah, it's a magical moment. There's a clip I think I've seen of you where she sort of puts her paws around you, and that could be quite painful.
So that's the other thing that's a lot of people, I suppose it boggles their minds as to why she doesn't rip you to pieces. But because unintentionally, their claws are sharp and they can come out. But they've got such control over their claws. And as they get older, like with all of us, things don't work as well as they used to. So Meg is now 19 years of age. Yeah, she's an old granny, and her sister passed away 2 years ago. She had now recently had to have her claws worked on by the vet because she's lost all of her retractiveness, the retractability in 2 or 3 of her claws. What actually happens in these aged lions is the claw starts to grow into the paw pad. They don't retract like they used to. And also because the claws are now sticking out, every time she jumps on you to give you a hug, she rips you open because her claws are sticking out. So it's unintentional, but it's just part of aging.
How did you assert yourself with your hyenas? I thought that was absolutely brilliant that the lowest ranking female is higher than the highest ranking male, but very intelligent animals. But how did you establish yourself in that clan?
The hyenas, I had a totally different view of when they first arrived. And I thought pretty much what everyone else, it's changing the view on hyenas. I do believe that. But I had that dim view of hyenas. I thought these animals were probably put on earth just to bug lions and to irritate them and to be made the villain in movies. Let's face it, they make great villains. And there's been so many, again, negative press around hyenas in feature films like The Lion King. Still to this day, it hasn't changed the narrative when it comes to these hyenas. And then there's been documentaries that have been embraced by the public, where they're portrayed to be these evil, horrible, smelly scavengers who are really just giving lions a hard time. And it's anything, there's nothing further from the truth when it comes to these really sophisticated and highly intelligent animals. And when you're dealing, and I think all women absolutely love to hear the hierarchy of a hyena clan. And I think, but I think, even in our society, I think we know our place. Males know our place. So we probably are more hyena-like than we would like to believe. But be that as it may, yes, it's a very complicated social structure. And if you get it wrong, you're going to, they're not going to spare you. They go in. But when you accept it, it's incredible. They are just so nurturing as mothers. They are the best mothers you will ever come across. I mean, they are really nurturing. Hyena moms are great moms. And if a hyena mother allows you with her cubs, you've cracked it. The rest of the clan really looks to the matriarch. And so the trick is to be very close to her and at all times, and for them to think that you are either a female-like creature, which they know you're not. They know you're a male. Even though you're human, they absolutely know the difference between male and female. So do the lions. The lions also absolutely know the difference. Yeah, it's interesting to know, like with hyenas, you really do have to be a different character. You can't apply the same methodology that you use to work with lions to work with hyenas. It's going to land you in hot water. It's the same with leopard. It's the same with cheetah. It's the same with birds. There are similarities, obviously, working with animals, be it horses or whatever you're working with. It just, does one take the time to observe and understand and then want to be part? And most people go, no thanks, I don't want to. But for me, it was always, yes, that sounds like a great idea. I want to see where I fit in. That's how I developed and forged relationships with hyena.
When you were trying all these different things, I guess you'd go into the enclosure. What was it that made you think, okay, that's what I need to do?
It's a lot of things. It comes down to youthfulness, I suppose, because I think if you had to chuck me into that situation now at 40, almost 48, now go and figure out a new species, predatory species, Kevin, got this good project. Do you want to go and integrate yourself into a group of grizzly bears? I'll probably say no. So youthfulness definitely was a motivator. And that's what's wonderful about young people, is that they are so energetic and wanting to challenge conventional wisdom. And it needs to be celebrated and embraced and not curbed and cut down. So frustration I have with society is that we are trying to keep everything too tame. Everything needs to be safe. We can't let our kids do anything that's not 100% safe, because God forbid something like life happen, then we want to sue somebody, or we want to blame somebody, or, we want everyone to be kept whole until the ripe old age of, I don't know what the magic number is, but we're not allowed to do anything to live an exciting life. Otherwise, we considered by the masses to be nuts. You're nuts if you do that.
Yeah, and of course, all that resilience and the self-esteem you get from getting something right, and all that self-belief you get in trying something and then thinking it through and then going back the next day and trying something different. We do it, particularly, I think, in London. We hover over our children, and so they never are able to figure out anything for themselves. And then that leaves them very snowflakey, as they say, when they get older and they do need to figure out some things. And they've got no experience of that.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And you talk about resilience, and I think the greatest resilience comes about when you fail. And so a lot of my failures have been successes, because they give you an excuse to try something over again. And I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a chance to do something over in a different way. And so that's important. But yes, you're right. The snowflakes out there would melt if they came under any kind of duress. It's just, where is it going to end? I sit back and I wonder, when are we actually going to get back to a point where we say, okay, just let them be and let's see. And hey, guess what? They figured it out. Wonderful. And that defined their character. Wow. Amazing. Humans have managed to get this far in our civilization.
Was there ever a time where you've been with one of your animals and the vibe has changed and you thought, oh, I've misjudged it, I shouldn't have come in today?
Absolutely.
Did you ever sort of see your life flash in front of your eyes?
Well, absolutely. I mean, have you ever had a situation where you've arrived home from work and you've misjudged your husband? And that's human on human.
Any relationship, you think, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Exactly. Your best friend blew up at you and told you all the things you've been doing wrong for 20 years of your friendship. And you go like, wow, I didn't see that coming.
Yes.
These are creatures that we spend our days, our most intimate moments with. So yes, of course, when you're working with animals that don't speak your language, you are bound to get it wrong from time to time. Fortunately, getting it wrong doesn't mean that's the end of you. It just means you got to figure out how to limit the damage if it's going to go as far as it biting you or clawing you or scratching you or doing whatever that an animal of that caliber does do. But lions are actually not like that. But many people think that they would retaliate like that. But a lot of the way that they gesture their frustration is a lot of noise. It's a lot of bark and no bite. I'm not going to sit here and say it's as simple as that, because it isn't. Because if you do misjudge it, that will be the end of you. So it's a combination of actually knowing and trusting your gut. It's about experience. It's about relationships. A lion in a lion pride, its goal is not to kill its pride members. They might have a tiff, but the goal is not to kill the other lion. It's really just to say, stop doing that or whatever. Like humans, we get into tiffs. We say, just stop it. And if you don't listen to my stop it, I might get more physical. And hyenas have their ways of telling you things. And if you don't listen, you will be bit. And when a hyena bites you, it's going to hurt. And it's going to send you to hospital every time. Trick is, don't go there. And if you do see it going there, then try and change the topic.
Yeah.
change the conversation.
Well, let's move on to the fact that you are trying to work yourself out of a job right now. As we said, though, thinking has changed. Lions aren't being sold in Harrods anymore, thank goodness. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. And it struck me that there are two things. One is the rapidly declining population of lions in the wild, which is the first issue. And the second is this booming industry around lions in captivity, which you touched on earlier on, which I wanted to come back to. So could we talk about both of those? The first one is the declining population. And I know there's a whole bunch of forces at play there. Could you talk us through that?
Well, the easiest way to explain declining lion populations is burgeoning human populations and our competition for habitat. When I hear people talk about, this is the reason lions are in peril here or there, or the main reason is habitat loss. And as we as humans expand more into lion territories, and it's not just, they lose their habitat because either humans are poaching their animals that they eat. So that could be a reason or a factor. And then lions are going to move greater distances. And then they come into conflict with people, inevitably. Or they see livestock as an easy prey item or as a prey item because there's nothing else to eat. The problem with a lion eating livestock is that they're very soon going to come into conflict with the human that owns the livestock. That's going to result in the lion being killed. So it's key to protect habitats and to conserve habitats and expand habitats if we want to see lion populations thrive. So it's foolhardy to believe that we're going to protect lions by allowing their habitats to shrink. We can then forget about all the other factors that affect lions. We hear people say, it's trophy hunting. It's disease. It's this, it's that. And it's to do with habitat. And we see that with every single species. So it's on the decline, is their habitats have been decimated or taken from them. We, at the foundation that I set up, one of its key pillars is to acquire habitat and protect habitat. So acquiring habitat is not glamorous. It's not like saying, guys, help me rescue Simba, help me rescue Christian from Harrods and send him back to Africa. And especially when you're trying to talk to people who live and don't understand the wilderness. They live in an apartment building in the middle of London. How do you make them understand or romanticize about buying some habitat? It's not glamorous, but it's glamorous to rescue lions.
But then you are rescuing lions by doing that. And that's what Gerald Durrell said in that quote, is that is it.
I loved it. Very profound and very on point. And so for me, I'm often asked why when my lions pass away, which they're all very old. I mean, Meg's, as I said, 19, and most of them are over the 15-year mark. And then we have a few, I call them younger lions, but the youngest being 7 years old. So even they are not young. So when all the lions pass away, then everyone's saying to me, well, why didn't you rescue lions from around the world? Because there's so many lions in horrible conditions that need rescuing. And I'm going, well, that is not going to protect lions in the wild. Rescuing a lion from a horrible captive situation and putting it in another captive situation just does nothing for wild lion conservation. And actually, where I am is wanting to see lions for future generations. So for me to sit here and ask you to donate some money so I can rescue a lion from a zoo or from a circus or from any other facility that's treating that lion badly, to bring it back, or not back, just to bring it to South Africa, to put it in an enclosure that, firstly, I think these lions don't live quite the wonderful lives that everyone would like to think they do. Because that's why I get criticized by a lot of people, is because of the relationship I have with my animals that gives them a more fulfilled life. So I want that to end. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot on my shoulders daily. I live in a little area or niche of my own. There's the hunting fraternity who hates me because I'm always going on about canned hunting and the ethics of hunting. And then there's the animal activist, or that community that also doesn't like me because they're saying, oh, you're sending a wrong message because you're interacting with your lions and you're perpetuating people wanting to pet a lion. People wanting to pet lions, and you're saying this, but you're confusing people. So I often say to people, I just sit in this little category of my own somewhere.
But what you're doing is far away different from those other captive lions. You're enriching their lives.
In many respects, they have a better life than a wild lion, because it's pretty hard being a wild lion. But Katie, you can't, in this day and age, in my opinion, you cannot take an animal and stick it in a cage like a zoo and just give it food and water and say you're doing a great job. It's just, for me, they need knowing them. And this is the challenge for a lot of people. If you get to know a lion as well as I know lions because of the personal relationships, you'll understand why that's not good for them. For me, the better model would be to let them live their lives. And once it's over, no more rescues. We focus on the wild, but we will be sitting with very good facilities. And already having spoken to wildlife vets who I work very closely with, they've been they're in desperate need of facilities that can house wild animals temporarily for rehabilitation to be released back into the wild. So I put up my hand and I said, that is exactly where I would like to be. The incumbents, the caveat is they can come stay at the hotel, but they have to leave.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it's not Hotel California. It's like
they can check out
anytime they want. So that's the idea going forward. We will slowly transform into a wildlife, mainly predator rehabilitation organization, whilst focusing on our goal of acquiring and protecting habitat. We need to make it more glamorous for people. I mean, I think people are smart enough to realize that we need to protect wilderness. And I think if we can get a few people who have deep pockets that could potentially see the benefit of, not just in Africa, but the world throughout, protect habitat and buy habitat, or work out with governments how to secure habitat, areas that people cannot access other than to go and view animals, like we have all these big parks and wilderness areas.
I think that's incredibly important, because it's not only protecting the lions, but also elephant, rhinos, the entire ecosystem. Back to the lions in captivity, I watched Ian Mitchell's documentary Blood Lions, and you have facilities that engage in some or all of the following activities. You can have intensive breeding, where cubs are taken from their mothers after a few days. Then for the tourists, you have cub petting, walking with lions, and you have canned hunting, where in some cases you can pick the animal you want to kill from a menu on the internet, come to the facility and kill the animal. So, Kevin, could you talk us through this cycle of exploitation?
The problem with certain facilities, yes, it's definitely poor treatment of the animals. But for me, the bigger problem with the whole lion breeding, petting, hunting is the mistruth or the lies that are perpetuated between the facilities where the people come to pet the lion and what happens to Simba at the end of the day. Some of these facilities, it's not in their best interest. So yes, bloodlines showed a side of the industry. A lot of these bigger players, they've got so many lions that they just neglect the welfare is definitely a big issue. But a lot of these other facilities will tell you that their lions are very well looked after, and they're not lying, because why would you show a malnourished lion cub to the public? Eventually the public's going to say, no, your cub doesn't look healthy. Get some care. The bigger problem for me was always when the tourist asks what's going to happen. Then they told this love story about how a pride of lions is going to go and be released into the wild. It's almost like a Christian the lion story. And everyone goes, oh, that's wonderful. Let me pet the cub, and they feel better about themselves. So for me, that was always a big, and still is, a big problem. But what we have seen over the last 2 years with COVID, and COVID has been good in some respects, is that with tourism really at its lowest that it's been in years in South Africa, those facilities have had to rethink how they go about generating an income, because now there wasn't for a long, long time, there hasn't been tourists coming to pet those lion cubs, but those lions still need to be fed. And so, your business model is not making a lot of sense, because you had an inlet and you had an outlet, and so now you're sitting with a lot of scrutiny. People are watching all the time what's happening. Facilities that say they're keeping all their lions, well, that's not an economically good model, is it? Because eventually you're going to run out of land, or you're going to run out of food, or you're going to run out of veterinary care. At what point do you become the crazy hoarding cat lady? Is it at 100 lions? Is it at 200 lions? What is the number? What I have seen is that a lot of these facilities on their own accord have started to change their ways. So 2 of the most notorious parks that offered up cub petting stopped it without being told to do so by the authorities or by public pressure. Well, I suppose it is public pressure in a sense, isn't it? Others will start to follow suit. What is seemingly happening is that there is this whole legislation that could change. So people are trying to get their houses in order. Perhaps in 5 years' time, it might be a thing of the past, like zoos in certain countries. Although I will say some will always be, these are the public petting facilities I'm talking about. The facilities that didn't have anything to do with that, but were breeding lions for the hunting industry, they will still exist if something isn't done about that. And that's purely breeding the big cats to be shot. Now, they will argue that it's no different to a cow farmer farming cows. What's the difference? Well, I think, we don't consume lions, nor should we at this point in time. But secondly, the reason for the breeding is really for the enjoyment of some bloodthirsty, I'm not even going to call him a hunter, to come and club a seal, so to speak, or fishing in a barrel with dynamite. So there's no hunting whatsoever when you breed a lion and then release it into a fake wild area and you shoot it. The ethical trophy hunters out there completely distance themselves from the captive lion hunting industry for those reasons. They said it wasn't sport hunting. It's put and take. It is also starting to wear thin, and they are coming under more and more scrutiny. Some conservation organizations will argue that hunting is a land use tool and a mechanism to conserve wild populations of animals. But some conservationists, I'm not going to say all, would argue the antithesis. They would say, no, hunting is not conservation. Hunting is murder. It's everything anti-evolution. It's blah, blah, blah. So there's going to always be these 2 sides arguing. I think personally where I sit is somewhere in the messy middle, because I think it's such a complicated thing, because even when you talk about banning hunting, and this is wild hunting, we must always just say and emphasize that, because often the lines between captive hunted animals and wild hunted animals, the lines get blurred and people talk about them interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. One of the problems of banning wild animal hunting is that a lot of the areas that this hunting takes place, the land would otherwise not be protected. These people have a purpose to protect the land. It's to allow hunting to happen, and we have a better diversity. So a lot of the anti-hunting lobbyists will say, no, that we need to transform that into photo tourism. And that's all very well and good if you've got an area that's conducive to photo tourism that your tourist wants to actually travel to. So yes, Sabi Sands, Kruger Park, Serengeti, we hear of all these names that people flock to. But you go out to some of these areas where hunting concessions are, no tourist wants to go there. So what is the alternative is what a lot of conservationists who are pro or tolerant, I'm not going to say they're pro hunting, they're tolerant of hunting. And what they are saying is come up with an alternative and we'll listen. And I guess I'm saying that too, is that give me the alternative to this usage of land that will keep it wild as habitat, as opposed to the hunters moving out, the poachers moving in, the land being decimated, then there's no animal there at all. And I have very heated conversations with my fellow conservationists saying, I don't disagree with either side. I hear every side's logic. You both, trust me, you both make a lot of sense. But where is the answer? Because you're not happy and you're not happy. But I say, normally the answer lies somewhere in the middle because both sides feel uncomfortable. It's almost like a divorce. Both parties need to feel slightly aggrieved for it to be a good divorce. If one party feels like they've won, it's not a good divorce. Ethical trophy hunters will tell you that they only will target the old. So he will have said that that big black maned lion, he's perpetuated his genes and his legacy lives on. And so when they will argue that taking out that 12-year-old lion has no impact on the environment or the ecosystem. But, and here's the big but, we see that ethics and morals go out the window when it comes to money. And corruption plays a huge role in South Africa and Africa when it comes to who can hunt what and who can get away with hunting whatever they want. Actually, so what happens is you'll get some wealthy tourist coming in and wanting to shoot a lion in its prime and get away with it. And it does have an impact on the gene pool. But the ethical hunter is going to go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't tar me with that brush. Every hunter likes to believe that he's the most ethical hunter that's ever walked the planet. And likewise, I will say with conservationists. You speak to any conservationist, they're going to tell you how wonderful they are and what they're doing, including myself. I'm sitting here guilty as charged. I'm trying to save lions. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to save habitat, actually. I just use lions as the lure. We are humans, fundamentally flawed. We've got to this point where we've created this massive problem. We know what the solutions are, but we understand that they're almost insurmountable. So we continue slowly down the same road, and unfortunately, there's going to be no change. And that's one of the, not to sound negative, because I'm an optimistic person, but I often say to my conservationist peers, where do you see humanity and habitat and lions in 200 years? Not 5, not 10, not 50. We're often talking about those numbers, but let's be brutally honest. Do you think in 200 years, things are going to look like they do now with what's happening right before your own eyes, with the lack of appetite to change from government level? And the answer is, I don't see lions, I don't see bears, I don't see polar bears, I don't see polar ice caps, I don't see any of the iconic species. All the smaller species will long time have been wiped out. And it sounds quite grim and doom and gloom, but it's the honest truth. Unless we can start to think about going down a different road. And that's the challenge, isn't it?
And how is your foundation, the Kevin Richardson Foundation, prioritizing all these issues?
Well, like a lion has 4 legs, our foundation has 4 legs and a tail. And the tail is to do all the other stuff that we need to do. But really, so first and foremost, if you're talking about acquiring and protecting habitat, that's great. But then we need to educate and empower people. And education sounds like an old cliche. Everyone's like, oh, the go-to word in conservation is education, because once we're all educated, it's all going to go away. But that's not true. That's the furthest thing from the truth, because I know a lot of educated people who continue to do things that are detrimental, including myself. So I do things that are completely detrimental because I suppose I'm allowed to. And anyone who tells you that they are living the perfect life is a hypocrite. Yeah, well, they love to tell you. Anyone who's become recently started a plant-based diet will absolutely dig into you about why you're such a bad person for still eating meat, which I do, but I understand all the pitfalls of it. So it does sound a bit hypocritical, doesn't it? But yeah, I'm the first to put up my hand when I say I'm not the oracle, and I'm certainly just trying to make change incrementally, at the same time educate myself. But if you don't educate these, specifically for me, it's the youth. I talk about it a lot. It's the youngsters, because they're impressionable. They want to make change. They're not scared of hard work, especially the youngsters. They're like sponges. And then you've got to empower them to make change. And I think that there is hope there. So if you can get a few of these people to say, no. But in a very, I know some people say you have to be very disruptive, like Greta Thunberg. You've got to kind of like be in your face. And I'm not sure that's always the way forward. But it has a place, I would say. Every little category, whether you like or love her or hate her, she certainly is a household name. The other pillar we often talk about is creating a bunch of collaborators, conservation collaborators. We all fight each other. It's human nature, I suppose. I'll like someone as long as they fit in with my ideology. The moment I find out something about someone that doesn't fit in with I love everything about them, every single thing. And then they tell me they're a Satanist. Sherbet, I didn't know that about you. Boom, end of friendship. You know what I'm saying? That is a line I cannot cross. And so everyone has their line that they cannot cross. The problem with conservation, and it's frustrated me, but I've come to terms with it and I've made peace with it. I've got no real agenda when it comes to working with like-minded people. If they want to work with me, and I can help, great, let's do it together. But unfortunately, in the arena, there's a lot of egos. That is a big stumbling block. And therefore, the bigger picture isn't always seen because of the individuals within an organization who have certain agendas and certain personality conflicts. And I'll give you an example is my interactions would exclude me from working with a few organizations because that is the satanic line you do not cross. And so it's unfortunate they don't see bigger pictures and they don't want to, and that's fine.
No, because you have a much more powerful voice if you're together than by doing everything individually. One can be to the detriment of the other. So yeah, I wish we could eradicate all our egos because it doesn't do the world any good.
It makes us human.
Makes us human and makes us flawed. Just to finish off, if you could just tell the young people one thing, doesn't even have to be about the environment, anything at all, what would it be?
I think stay true to yourself, and stop worrying about what other people think or what you think other people want you to be. Be who you are and be proud of who you are. And that was something that I took a long time to figure out. There's going to be people in the world who love you. There's going to be people in the world who hate you, no matter what you do. So, you can think that it's because of something I'm doing now. That's why I've got people who hate me. And if I didn't do that, I'd be loved by everyone. There's this need for acceptance. It's a human thing, I think. I think we all just want to be loved by everyone. It's the old problem of reading your Instagram comments and every one of them is positive except for one. And you go, why does that person not like me? I don't. Not anymore. I used to. I will be totally honest. And that ship has sailed a long time ago.
True. Now, finally, I want to talk about Dave Yarrow because I know this interview wouldn't have been possible without him. And for listeners who don't know him, he is one of the world's greatest photographers. You have to go online and check out his masterpieces. They are truly masterpieces. And 3 former US presidents have had them on their wall, so they can't all be wrong. He's also a passionate conservationist, and some of his photos are of your lions. So how did you actually get to meet him?
Well, he actually approached me in about, I think it was 2014. He approached through one of the ladies who I work with. You know, he had some ambitious idea. He always has ambitious ideas, which is great. We entertained it, and I got to meet him, and it was the best decision I think we made as a team, meeting him. We hit it off. We're very similar in many respects. I don't claim to be near as knowledgeable or as articulate as David, but he's a fantastic guy. He's a creative. He's a thinker. He's a disruptor. He's trodden on people's toes like I have, but he gets people thinking. People hate him. People love him. What I like about David is the positivity is infectious. Being around positive people, you can just be around them all day long, and they energize you. And when you're around negative people, they drain you, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
Yeah, you're right. Kevin, thank you for talking to me. I have 2 quotes. The first, I think, relates to the seemingly insurmountable challenges facing conservationists, and it's from Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." And I love that. And then as for the second, Mahatma Gandhi said, "The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated." And I think that applies to nations, but I also think it applies to individuals, in which case, as far as I'm concerned, you are top of the tree. So good luck with the incredibly important work you do. In the show notes, we'll put links to your foundation and to other related publications and content. But for now, Kevin, thank you. I've learned so much from our conversation, and I am really grateful.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And sometimes it's good to just, voice what's in my head as well to somebody who's wanting to listen. So, I hope the audience out there just listens to both sides of the story and just gets a better understanding of how complicated this whole conservation world is.